The Alcatraz escape, boldest prison break in U.S. history, history's greatest mysteries. The night the impossible happened. The sound of waves slammed against the dark rocks as the cold wind of San Francisco Bay cut through the silence. Inside cell block B of Alcatraz, the prison said to be impossible to escape, a thin layer of plaster quietly crumbled behind a metal vent. At 10:30 p.m., while guards walked their last round, an inmate named Frank Morris slowly lifted a fake papier-mâché head, hair made from real clippings, skin painted from prison soap and newspapers. He placed it on his pillow, pulled the blanket up, and stepped into the small hole in his wall. Across two other cells, brothers John and Clarence Anglin did the exact same thing. 3 invisible shadows crawled through the inside of the prison walls, climbing rusty pipes and crawling across dusty rafters above the guards' heads. Then at midnight, a loud clanging sound echoed through the building. A guard paused. He looked around. Silence. He walked away. And up on the roof, barely visible in the fog, 3 men were gone. But did they actually survive the brutal waters of the bay? Or did they vanish forever? This is the story of the boldest prison break in U.S. history, the Alcatraz escape. The men who refused to be broken. Before the world knew their names, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were known for something else, being smart, quiet, and extremely determined. Frank Morris. Frank grew up moving from home to home. But one thing stood out: he was incredibly intelligent. Some reports say he tested in the top 2% of the country. He didn't talk much, but he watched everything, every guard's habit, every blind spot, every locked door. The Anglin brothers. John and Clarence Anglin grew up in a farming family. They were strong, fast, and loyal to each other. They robbed banks together, never hurting anyone, but always sticking to their rule: only steal from closed banks at night. The government didn't like how the brothers kept escaping from other prisons. So, they were sent to Alcatraz, the island prison known as the Rock. Once they arrived, the 3 men didn't talk much. But inside, all of them were thinking the same thing. There has to be a way out. A prison built to break you. Alcatraz was designed to crush hope. Cells were tiny. The wind was freezing. Guards were strict. And the ocean around the island was deadly cold, strong currents, sharks, and waves that could flip a boat in seconds. Everyone believed escape was impossible. Everyone, except these 3. The meeting. Inside the prison yard, the men started talking quietly, sharing ideas, testing the guards, studying every corner of the prison. Then one day, Frank Morris pointed at the metal vent in his cell wall and whispered, "Behind this is the way out." From that moment, the plan began. Quiet, careful, and unbelievably clever. The secret work begins. The plan didn't start with running or fighting. It started with listening. Every night at Alcatraz, the prison had a strange sound, a loud, constant hum from old ventilation fans, pipes, and generators. The noise echoed through the cells like heavy wind. Frank Morris realized something important. With this noise, they can't hear us digging. And so, the escape truly began. The vent in the wall. Each inmate's cell had a small metal vent near the floor, barely big enough for a fist. Behind that vent was a dark utility corridor, a hidden pathway used only by maintenance workers. If they could open that vent wide enough, they could squeeze inside and disappear into the prison walls. But breaking through solid concrete wasn't easy. They needed tools. The homemade tools. In a prison where even a spoon was dangerous, these men created tools from things nobody noticed. Broken metal spoons stolen from the cafeteria. Rock-hard metal from a broken vacuum cleaner motor. Sandpaper smuggled from the workshop. And small pieces of wood to make the tools look harmless. They sharpened the metal until it worked like small chisels. Then, one piece at a time, the walls began to break. Digging in the dark. Every night, while guards walked past their cells, the men took turns. Stuffing towels at the bottom of the door to block dust. Hiding the digging noise behind the loud prison hum. Chipping away tiny pieces of concrete. Filling cups with dust. Emptying the dust into toilet drains during the day. It took weeks. The months. Slowly, the vent holes grew from the size of a fist to the size of a head. to a hole just big enough for a grown man to slide through. The papier-mâché heads. But there was one problem: guards counted prisoners every night. So the men made fake heads using wet toilet paper, real hair collected from the barber shop, paint made from stolen art supplies. In dim light, the heads looked shockingly real, even up close. If they escaped their cells at night, the heads would fool the guards. The roof above the prison. Once they crawled through the vent holes, they reached a hidden space above the cell block, a dusty attic filled with pipes, darkness, and one old fan blocking the way to the roof. The fan was loud and dangerous. But if they could remove the screws and break it, they could climb through. This part of the plan was risky. One wrong sound, and it was over. But Frank Morris had a plan for the fan. He was about to do something no prisoner had ever tried before. Breaking the fan and reaching the roof. The hidden attic space above the cells was cold, dark, and filled with dust that stung their eyes. But for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, this secret area was the only road to freedom. In front of them was the biggest obstacle so far. A large metal ventilation fan bolted to the wall, spinning nonstop, blocking the exit to the roof. If they couldn't get past it, the escape was over. The plan to stop the fan. The fan wasn't just loud, it was dangerous and strong. Touching the blades could tear skin instantly. So the men watched it every night, studying how it shook, how it slowed when the power dipped, how the screws held it in place. Frank Morris finally whispered, "We break the screws, the fan falls, and the hole becomes our path." But they only had makeshift tools, scrap metal knives and small wrenches they made in the workshop. This wasn't supposed to work, but they had no other choice. Taking turns in the dark. Night after night, they crawled into the attic, crawling along thin wooden beams far above the guards, moving slowly so they wouldn't make noise, using flashlights made from old batteries and stolen wire, working on the screws until their hands shook. Each screw took days. Every tiny movement felt painfully slow. And below them, guards walked their normal routes, completely unaware that just a few feet above their heads, 3 men were slowly creating a hole to freedom. The moment of truth. One night, after months of work, the last screw finally loosened. Frank held the fan in place so it wouldn't crash loudly and alert the guards. The Anglin brothers steadied the frame. And together, they tilted it sideways, and the entire fan quietly slipped out of the wall. Behind it was a dark opening, cold air rushing through, smelling like the outside world. For the first time, they could feel real night air on their faces. It was working, building a raft. But escaping the prison wasn't enough. They needed to cross the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay, waves so deadly that even trained swimmers didn't survive. A boat would be impossible to steal. So they came up with something that shocked investigators for decades. They would build their own raft and life vests inside Alcatraz. Using more than 50 stolen raincoats. They stitched them together using needles made from sharpened spoons, yarn pulled from old clothing, and glue made by melting pieces of rubber. It was unbelievable, but real. The raft became large enough for 3 grown men. The life jackets were waterproof. They even built wooden paddles from scrap. All of this was done secretly, stored in the attic above the cells, hidden from every guard. The final piece. Now there was only one more thing left. They needed to reach the roof without being seen. And once again, they had a plan. The night of the escape. June 11, 1962. A cold, windy night on Alcatraz Island. Fog covered everything like a blanket. The perfect moment, or the last chance they would ever get. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers sat quietly in their cells during the final count. Each man waited for the sound they needed. The guards' footsteps walking away for the night. At 9:30 p.m., the lights dimmed. At 10 p.m., the last round ended. And then, silence. This was it. The fake heads take their place. Frank carefully lifted the papier-mâché head he made with soap, toilet paper, and real hair. It looked shockingly real in the shadows. He placed it on his pillow and tucked the blanket around it. John and Clarence Anglin did the same. From the front of the cells, it looked like they were sleeping peacefully. In the darkness, it looked perfect. If guards glanced in, they wouldn't notice anything wrong. Slipping into the holes. One by one, the men quietly removed the metal vents. Behind each vent was the tunnel they dug for months. Frank went first. He slowly turned sideways and slid his body into the hole. Concrete scraped his shoulders. Dust filled the air. But he didn't stop. Then John. Then Clarence. Inside the walls of Alcatraz, they became shadows moving through darkness. The climb to the attic. They reached the utility corridor, a long, narrow pathway behind the cells. Above them was the wooden beam they had climbed hundreds of times while building the plan. Using the pipes and beams, they climbed toward the attic, pulling themselves up silently. Their hearts pounded. One loud noise, and everything was over. But the constant humming of the prison's machinery hid their movements, just like Frank had predicted. The final check. In the attic, their raft, paddles, and life jackets waited exactly where they left them. They checked everything quickly. Raft? Life vests? Wooden paddles? There was no going back now. If something failed, they would die in the water. But if they stayed in Alcatraz, they would die slowly anyway. They chose freedom. Reaching the roof. The opening where the ventilation fan used to be now revealed a dark, windy climb upward. They squeezed through carefully and stepped onto a narrow pipe that led toward the roof. Frank pushed the wooden grate aside. Cold air rushed in. He whispered, "Go." The men climbed onto the roof of Alcatraz, a place almost no inmate had ever reached. The dangerous walk across the roof. The rooftop was slippery from fog. Below them, guards were still on duty. Their flashlights moved across the yard. One wrong move, one sound, and they'd be spotted instantly. But the fog was heavy. The night was cold. And luck was on their side. They crawled across the rooftop, staying low, barely visible. The ocean roared below them. Then they reached the edge. A 50-foot drop down to a quiet service corridor. They lowered themselves by sliding down a metal pipe. Their hands burned, their clothes scraped, but they made it. Now they were outside the main prison. For the first time. The shocking discovery. Inside the prison, a guard walked past their empty cells. He paused. He stared. The fake heads looked real enough that he moved on. They weren't missed. Not yet. Outside, the men carried their raft to the water's edge. They were now standing on the northeast shoreline of Alcatraz, the same area where the waves were strongest, and the water was the coldest. And this was the moment everything would be decided. Into the deadly waters of San Francisco Bay. The moon was hidden behind thick fog, and the wind pushed cold air across the island. Standing on the rocky shoreline, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers stared at the black water below them. This was the final barrier. The barrier that made Alcatraz escape-proof. The powerful currents. The freezing temperatures. The unpredictable waves. Many believed no human could survive this water. But the three men had no choice. Everything they built, everything they planned, came down to this moment. Unfolding the raft. The raft made from stolen raincoats was heavy but tightly packed. They carried it carefully, trying not to slip on the wet rocks. Frank whispered, "We do it fast. Don't let it fill with water." They unfolded the raincoat raft and used the small accordion-style pump they built to inflate it. The rubber hissed as air filled the seams. Slowly, the shape formed. A real raft, inside the world's toughest prison. It took months to make. Now it had to work for only one night. The current was stronger than expected. Waves crashed against the rocks. Some splashed high enough to wet their clothes instantly. Clarence touched the water. He pulled his hand back fast. It was painfully cold. But hesitation wasn't an option. Guards were still inside the prison. At any moment, someone could notice the fake heads weren't breathing. That the real men were gone. The launch. Frank counted softly. 1, 2, 3. They pushed the raft into the water. At first, the waves tried to slam it back into the rocks. The men held tight. They leaned forward. And finally, the raft drifted out onto the open water. This was it. They climbed in, one by one, careful not to flip it. The raft bobbed awkwardly in the waves. The current immediately began dragging them away from Alcatraz. Exactly what they hoped for. The dark journey begins. They paddled using the wooden oars they built in the attic. Each stroke was slow and heavy. The cold cut through their raincoats, but they kept going. Fog covered everything. They couldn't see the city lights clearly. They couldn't see the island behind them. They paddled blindly, trusting only the direction of the current. For the first time, the three men were outside Alcatraz, completely free, but surrounded by the deadliest water in America. Meanwhile, inside Alcatraz, a guard walked past Frank Morris's cell again. He glanced inside, saw the sleeping head turned toward the wall. Nothing unusual. He moved on. The escape was still a secret. Back on the water, the unknown moment. The raft drifted farther and farther away from the island. Somewhere in the darkness, something changed. The waves grew stronger. The wind picked up. And one of the brothers shouted, "Watch the right side. It's taking water." They paddled harder, trying to keep the raft balanced. Suddenly, the fog swallowed them completely. No one could see what happened next. Not the guards. Not the city. Not the Coast Guard. For the next several hours, the three escapees were invisible, and the world would never be certain of what happened to them. The discovery that shocked America. Morning came fast. The fog lifted slowly, revealing the gray, cold outline of Alcatraz Island. Inside the prison, everything seemed normal until 7:15 a.m., when guards began the first head count of the day. A guard stopped at Frank Morris's cell. "Frank, get up." Silence. He stepped closer. He tapped the head on the pillow. It rolled off the bed and hit the floor. The guard froze. He stared at the lifeless papier-mâché face, the paint, the real hair glued on top, and instantly understood. Escape. "We've been fooled." His shout echoed through the cell block. "Count, count. Escape in B block." Alarms blasted through the prison. Guards ran down the hallway. Doors slammed. Every inmate jerked awake. Within minutes, they discovered the same thing in the Anglin brothers' cells. 3 perfect fake heads. 3 empty beds. 3 missing prisoners. Alcatraz, the prison that claimed escape was impossible, had been beaten. The search begins immediately. Warden Olin Blackwell arrived, furious and confused. How could 3 men dig through concrete, climb through the walls, break onto the roof, build a raft, and reach the ocean without anyone noticing? The guards rushed to the utility corridor. What they found shocked them. 3 widened vent holes. Tunnels carved behind the cells. A hidden attic workspace. Tools made from spoons and metal scraps. Leftover raincoat pieces. And the spot where the ventilation fan used to be. It was a complete escape workshop, and no one had discovered it for months. Even the FBI was stunned. The search of the bay. Boats instantly went into the water. Helicopters hovered over the bay. The Coast Guard scanned every wave. They searched the waters around Alcatraz, Angel Island, Treasure Island, San Francisco's shoreline. For hours, nothing. Then, near Angel Island, officers found something floating. A piece of wood. Another piece of rubber. A homemade paddle. The raft had made it far, at least to the middle of the bay. But still, no bodies. The life jacket discovery. Later that day, a torn, damaged raincoat life jacket washed ashore. It had bite marks, possibly from sea lions or sharks. To investigators, this meant 2 things. The raft had definitely been used. Something violent may have happened in the water. But again, no bodies were found. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. The FBI takes control. FBI agent Harold "Doc" Evans led the investigation. He studied every detail, the tunnels, the fan, the raft. He believed the men drowned. He believed the cold water and strong currents were too much. But he had a problem. There was no proof. No eyewitnesses. No remains. No floating debris from the raft besides the paddles. And secretly, some investigators began to wonder. What if they made it? The warden's statement. Reporters flooded the island. Cameras flashed. Everyone demanded answers. Warden Blackwell told them, They drowned. No one survives that water. No one. But behind closed doors, even he wasn't sure. Because if 3 men from poor backgrounds could outsmart America's most secure prison, it meant Alcatraz wasn't perfect. And that was something the government did not want the public to believe. The quiet theory. Some guards whispered another idea. If they made it to Angel Island, they could have disappeared into the mainland. New lives. New names. But it was only a whisper. No evidence. Only a possibility. And for investigators, that was the most unsettling part. The men were smart enough to escape Alcatraz. They were clever enough to build a raft. And maybe, just maybe, they were strong enough to survive the bay. Clues that refused to die. For weeks after the escape, the FBI searched nonstop. Helicopters circled the bay. Boats scanned every inch of water. Agents checked hospitals, bus stations, docks, and train depots across California. But the 3 men were gone. No bodies. No footprints. No backpacks. No confirmed sightings. To the FBI, that was more frustrating than anything else. Criminals usually made mistakes. But Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers left almost nothing behind. Still, over the years, strange clues began to appear. The family clue, the boys made it. The Anglin family always believed John and Clarence survived. They said the brothers were strong swimmers, tough, and skilled at surviving outdoors. Then came the strange part. Every year, on Christmas Day, their mother received one unusual gift. A single flower. Delivered by an unknown person. No note. No name. No explanation. Just a flower. It kept happening for several years after the escape. The family swore that only the brothers knew that tradition. No one else. Investigators couldn't confirm it, but they couldn't disprove it either. The Brazil photo. In the 1970s, a man brought a photograph to the FBI. It showed 2 men, older, bearded, sitting on a small farm in Brazil. He claimed the men in the photo were John and Clarence Anglin. The photo looked close enough that the FBI tested it decades later with advanced facial recognition technology. The results? Highly likely. But not 100% proven. Not enough to close the case. And not enough to reopen it officially. He kept the mystery alive. The letter that shocked the world. In 2013, more than 50 years after the escape, a local San Francisco TV station received a handwritten letter. The writer claimed to be John Anglin, from the Alcatraz escape. The letter said, "I'm alive. I'm old. I have cancer. I want help before I die." He said the escape did happen, but the journey was brutal and dangerous. He claimed, Frank Morris died in 2008. Clarence Anglin died in 2011. He was the last survivor. He said he had lived in San Diego, then North Dakota, and later in Seattle. The FBI tested the letter for fingerprints and DNA, but the results were incomplete. Not a match, but not ruled out either. The letter was never proven real, and never proven fake. It went straight into the FBI's cold case files. The debate inside the FBI. For decades, agents argued over what truly happened. Team 1, they drowned. These agents believed the water was too cold, the currents too strong, the raft too weak, the men too inexperienced. They believed the raft fell apart in the waves, and the men sank beneath the surface before reaching land. Team 2, they made it. These investigators had a different view. No bodies ever found. No clothing washed ashore. No debris except one paddle. The raft clearly traveled far. The men were smart, clever, and determined. And most importantly, criminals who die in escapes usually leave evidence. Here, there was none. The final government statement. For years, the official message from the U.S. government was simple. No, the escapees did not survive. But documents released years later told a different story. Private notes written by FBI agents said, there is a reasonable probability the Anglin brothers reached land. Even the U.S. Marshals, who still technically have the case open, admitted something surprising. We will stop searching when the men turn 99 years old, unless we find proof they are dead first. In other words, they're not sure either. Theories, eyewitnesses, and hidden evidence. For more than 60 years, experts, investigators, scientists, and amateur detectives have tried to answer one question. Did the men survive, or did the bay take them? To solve this mystery, we must look at three things: the water and ocean currents, eyewitness reports, hidden evidence the public rarely hears about. Each one leads to a different truth. Theory 1. They drowned in the bay. This was the government's official conclusion for decades. Here's why some investigators believed the men didn't survive. The water temperature. San Francisco Bay water is dangerously cold, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit 10 degrees Celsius that night. Experts say the body starts shutting down within minutes. Without proper insulation, a person can lose strength so fast that they can't even keep their head above water. The waves and currents. That night, the tide was moving outward, away from San Francisco. This means the men would have been pushed toward the Golden Gate Bridge, the Pacific Ocean. Very deep, dangerous water. If the raft broke, survival would be nearly impossible. The damaged life jacket. The torn raincoat life vest found on the shore made investigators think someone panicked or fell out. But again, no bodies were found. And that brings us to the second theory. Theory 2, they made it to Angel Island. This theory convinced many experts, including scientists years later, that the escape was achievable. The raft's direction. The homemade paddle found near Angel Island suggested the raft moved in that direction. If the men aimed for Angel Island, they could rest there without being seen. Then at dawn, they could steal a small boat or blend into the early morning ferry crowd. Timing of the tides. In 2014, Dutch scientists recreated the exact ocean conditions of that night using advanced water flow models. The result? At the exact time the men escaped, the currents would have carried them safely toward Angel Island, but only if they left after 11:30 p.m. The escape happened around that time. This was huge. It meant survival was scientifically possible. The footprints on Angel Island. This detail is rarely mentioned. The morning after the escape, fresh footprints were found leading away from the shoreline on Angel Island, the same direction the raft would have traveled. Were they from hikers? From police? From the escapees? No one knows. But the discovery was never fully explained. Theory 3, they escaped. And someone helped them. This theory became popular after investigators interviewed the Anglin family. The brothers grew up working on farms near water. They were strong swimmers. And they had relatives living in Florida, Georgia, Michigan, South America. Some retired U.S. Marshals privately believed the escape was planned with outside help. But the boat's sighting. A San Francisco resident reported seeing a small boat floating near Alcatraz around midnight, at the exact time of the escape. The boat had no lights. It was quiet, and the person inside wasn't fishing. The sighting was never confirmed, but never disproven. If someone met the raft halfway, the escape would have been far easier. Theory 4. They lived secret lives for decades. This theory became stronger because of real clues. 1. The Brazil photo, high probability match. The picture of two older men on a farm in Brazil, matching the Anglin brothers, shocked investigators. The facial match was nearly identical. The jawline, the nose, the eyes. Even the FBI admitted the photo could be real. 2. The mysterious Christmas flowers. For years, fresh flowers showed up at the Anglin mother's house on Christmas Day. Only the brothers did that tradition. And it started again after the escape. 3. The 2013 letter. The letter claiming to be from John Anglin added more details that investigators couldn't explain away. Some handwriting experts said it could be legit. Others said no. But the FBI never released the full DNA results. Theory 5. They died in the ocean, but the bodies were never found. Some believe the men didn't survive long, but the bay currents carried their bodies out into the Pacific Ocean, where they sank or were eaten by animals. It sounds possible, but even this theory has holes. Bodies usually float eventually. Clothing usually washes ashore. Debris usually appears. But here, almost nothing was ever found. This makes investigators believe something unusual happened. The big question: if they survived, where did they go? If they died, why was there no proof? This mystery captured America's imagination. Every clue, every missing detail, every strange sighting only made the case more legendary. 'Cause sometimes, no answer is the answer. Modern technology reopens the case. For decades, the Alcatraz escape was treated like a legend, a story that lived somewhere between truth and myth. But as technology improved, investigators decided to use new tools to study an old mystery. And what they found changed everything. The U.S. Marshals take over. By the 1990s, the FBI had closed their active investigation, claiming the escapees likely drowned. But the U.S. Marshals Service, whose job is to chase fugitives, refused to stop. As long as the men are not proven dead, the case stays open. This meant new interviews, new evidence checks, new surveillance, and new scientific testing. The Marshals believed one thing: if the men survived, they would eventually slip up. But they didn't. Not once. This only made the Marshals more curious. The 3D ocean simulation that changed history. In 2014, a team of Dutch scientists from Delft University used cutting-edge simulation software to recreate the bay's water movement from June 11, 1962, down to tide height, wind speed, and current strength. The results were shocking. The findings: if Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers pushed off between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, the current would have carried them safely toward Angel Island. If they left too early, they'd be pushed into open ocean. Too late, and they would circle back toward Alcatraz. But their escape time, based on guard schedules, matched the successful window almost perfectly. Science proved the escape was physically possible. The FBI face recognition analysis. When the Brazil farm photo surfaced, modern analysts used advanced facial recognition tools to compare eye spacing, cheekbone height, nose shape, ear structure. The result? The men in the Brazil photo were very likely the Anglin brothers. Again, not 100% confirmed, but strong enough to keep the investigation alive. The unreleased DNA results. When the mysterious 2013 letter appeared, allegedly written by John Anglin, the FBI tested fingerprints, handwriting, paper age. But the results were odd. The DNA test was inconclusive. The fingerprints were partial. The handwriting test said, possible match. And the paper age was consistent with the time the letter was mailed. The FBI never publicly released the full results. This secrecy made people wonder, was the letter real? And did the FBI learn something they didn't want to reveal? Modern sightings and new leads. Over the decades, there were multiple reports of the escapees being seen in Florida, Georgia, Kansas City, Mexico, Brazil, Cuba. Most were dismissed, but a few were compelling. The farmer in Brazil. A Brazilian farmer claimed 2 Americans lived near him in the 1970s. Spoke little Portuguese. Kept to themselves. Worked hard. Disappeared suddenly after the FBI came asking questions. He said the photo he shared was the Anglin brothers. Some investigators believed him. Others didn't. The last official statement. A high-ranking U.S. Marshal made a quiet, powerful statement in 2018. If the Anglin brothers are alive, they would be in their 90s. But until we have proof of death, we cannot close the case. This means the U.S. government, to this day, does not know what happened. No bodies. No confirmed deaths. No proof the men drowned. No proof they survived. Just a mystery frozen in time. The question that still haunts investigators. Why was there no trace of their clothes? No trace of their raft? No trace of their bodies? No trace of their supplies? No verified signal from the water? In every other ocean escape attempt from Alcatraz, something always washed ashore. But for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, nothing conclusive ever did. This chapter leaves us with one truth. The greatest prison escape in U.S. history remains unsolved. Not because we lack answers, but because the answers refuse to settle on one side. The final possibilities and the truth they never wanted revealed. More than 60 years have passed since that foggy night. The world has changed, but the mystery of the Alcatraz escape refuses to die. As investigators dug deeper over the decades, one thing became clear. There were clues that the public never knew about. Clues that suggested the escape might have succeeded. Let's uncover them. The secret U.S. Marshal's report. The brothers may have survived. In the 1980s, a retired marshal admitted something surprising. We found evidence they might have lived. But it wasn't enough to close the case. He never revealed everything publicly. But parts of the report leaked years later. Inside the report were 3 crucial notes. 1. The Anglin family polygraph test. Several family members took lie detector tests about letters and secret messages they claimed the brothers sent after the escape. Most of them passed. The marshals never released that information until years later. 2. The Midwest lead. A witness said he lived next door to 2 quiet, older men who matched the Anglin brothers' description. Never talked about their past. Worked simple jobs. Paid everything in cash. Left suddenly when a news report mentioned the escape anniversary. When marshals arrived, the house was empty. 3. The possible grave in Brazil. A man claimed a local cemetery in Brazil held Clarence Anglin's grave, buried with a false name. The marshals traveled there but couldn't legally exhume the body because of local laws. Still, the lead wasn't dismissed. The reality, Frank Morris was the master brain. Most evidence pointed to a powerful truth. Frank Morris was too smart to leave anything to chance. He chose the escape date based on tides. Timed the guards' movements. Calculated how long the dig would take. Built the raft. Created the fake heads. And planned the swim route. He wasn't reckless. He was strategic. Even former Alcatraz guards admitted. If anyone could escape, it was Frank Morris. The one clue left in the prison walls. During renovations of Alcatraz decades later, a construction worker found something wedged deep inside the old ventilation area. A small piece of rubber from a raincoat, cut in a perfect rectangle. It looked like part of an extra flotation device, meaning the men prepared more equipment than investigators originally realized. This detail suggested the escape was even more organized than the FBI believed. Theory: they hid in plain sight. Some experts believe the men likely reached Angel Island, rested there until daylight, stole clothes from a nearby camp, took a boat or slipped onto a ferry, blended into early morning crowds in San Francisco. From there, they could catch buses heading anywhere in the country. Remember, in the 1960s, there were no computer ID checks, no surveillance cameras, and very limited border security. Once they left California, they could vanish forever. The reason the case haunts investigators. To this day, the question that bothers experts the most is, why were their bodies never found? Even people who drowned in the bay during the same time period eventually washed up. But the escapees? Nothing. Not one bone. Not one piece of clothing. Not one confirmed sign. And that silence is louder than any evidence. The final possibility: the men lived long enough to die free. Some U.S. Marshals quietly believe the men lived decades after the escape. Because the Anglin brothers' alleged Brazil photo showed them in their 60s or 70s. The 2013 letter claimed at least one of them lived into his 80s. The family insisted they made contact for years. No evidence ever proved their deaths before old age. The most chilling part? If the escapees did survive, they could have lived out their final years quietly, working on farms, living under new names, never telling anyone who they really were. A peaceful, hidden life. The exact opposite of the prison they escaped from. And if that happened, then the Alcatraz escape wasn't just bold. It wasn't just legendary. It was successful. The aftermath and the legacy that changed history. When the escape was discovered, it didn't just shake Alcatraz. It shook America. Newspapers exploded with headlines. Radio stations ran non-stop updates. Families debated the mystery in their living rooms. For the first time, the public realized, if these 3 men could escape the rock, maybe the prison wasn't truly escape-proof. And that single idea changed everything. The family left in the shadows. While the government searched for answers, the families of the escapees lived through decades of fear, hope, and silence. The Anglin family pain. The Anglin family insisted for years that John and Clarence survived. But that belief came with a price. Their home was raided more than once. Family members were questioned again and again. Private letters were seized. They lived under suspicion for decades. Some relatives admitted they felt like prisoners themselves, trapped in a mystery they weren't allowed to escape. Frank Morris's story ended with questions. Frank had no close family to speak for him, but investigators respected his intelligence. One retired agent said, "Frank was too smart to die on that bay. He planned things 5 steps ahead." To this day, no one knows what became of him. His story remains a ghost in American history. The government's fear. Behind closed doors, officials worried about something far bigger than 3 escapees. If Alcatraz wasn't inescapable, its entire reputation collapsed. The island was built on the idea of absolute security, a place where the worst criminals vanished forever. This escape embarrassed the prison system. It exposed flaws. It broke the myth. Just 1 year after the escape, the government started quietly discussing something unthinkable: closing Alcatraz. And in 1963, less than a year later, that's exactly what happened. The escape didn't just make history, it ended history. The prisoners who followed. After the escape, inmates across the country whispered the same thing. If those guys could do it, maybe we can too. Prison security systems across America changed. Stronger fences, better cameras, tighter inmate monitoring, more controlled movements, improved head counts. The Alcatraz escape created an entire wave of prison reform. Even though the men were never found, their actions forced the government to evolve. The myth, the movies, the legend. The story inspired movies, books, documentaries, theories, investigations, tour guides, and countless debates. Alcatraz became one of the world's most famous tourist attractions because of this single escape. Every year, millions of people walk through cell block B, stand in front of the tunnels, and ask the same question: did they make it? The mystery is what turned the escape into a global legend. The emotional truth. Whether the men survived or died, their story represents something deep and powerful. The human desire for freedom, even when the world thinks it's impossible. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were not heroes. They were not innocent men. They were prisoners with a criminal past. But for one night, they became symbols of hope, courage, and defiance. The world became fascinated not with who they were, but with what they dared to do. Because escaping Alcatraz wasn't about crime. It was about willpower. And that is why the mystery refuses to fade. The case remains open. To this day, no remains, no confirmed sightings, no confessions, no closure. The U.S. Marshals officially consider the 3 men wanted fugitives until they would be 99 years old. Only then will the case be closed. Because even after 6 decades, no one has ever proven they died. And no one has ever proven they lived. The truth sits somewhere in between. A place as cold, deep, and mysterious as the waters surrounding Alcatraz. The mystery that refuses to die. The escape from Alcatraz wasn't just a prison break. It was a moment that changed American history. 3 men, armed with nothing but raincoats, spoons, courage, and a plan, challenged the most secure prison the U.S. had ever built. They dug through concrete, crawled through the walls, climbed into the attic, reached the roof, built a raft out of stolen raincoats, and disappeared into the black water of San Francisco Bay. And after all these years, after all the investigations, after every search, every test, every eyewitness and theory, the truth still stands in the fog. No bodies, no confirmed deaths, no final answers. Just a question that echoes across history. Did they survive? Maybe they drowned in the icy waves that night. Maybe the current pulled them out to sea. Maybe their raft failed. Or maybe, just maybe, they made it. Maybe 3 men who refused to be broken by Alcatraz lived long enough to breathe free air, build new lives, and vanish into the world, leaving behind the greatest unsolved escape in American history. Because the power of this story isn't in whether they lived or died. It's in knowing that 3 men dared to try the impossible. And the world has been searching for them ever since. The Alcatraz escape remains a legend, a mystery frozen in time, a question no one can answer, and a story that will outlive us all.